Good evening, everyone. It's great to have you here tonight. Really appreciate you all being here. The seats are full. Look at that. Fantastic. It's just a pleasure to welcome you. My name is Denise Lucy, and I'm a professor and executive director of the Institute for Leadership Studies, and it is my great pleasure and honor to be the terrific partner and friend to Bill and Elaine Petruccelli, who help us produce these remarkable lectures for 20 years. This is our 20th anniversary. Yes, it's pretty amazing. And this is our 188th lecture, I think, from all the most famous writers in our country, and it's tremendously great honor to have you here tonight. And we are welcoming Isabel Allende back to Dominican University. I counted of that. She's been here 7 times. Are we lucky? Yes, we are. She's a wonderful friend of our university. She has an honorary doctorate from Dominican University. She has been a tremendous partner and friend to us. And we're so grateful for her tonight to share her new novel. My name is Emilia del Valle. The lecture series is a project of the Institute for Leadership Studies, which is a leadership development center offering training and development both for degree seekers as well as professionals to learn more about how to become a better leader and team member. And it's just an honor to work with colleagues that support that mission. As I mentioned, Elaine and Bill Petruccelli are our partners, and what an amazing Center for Learning they have created over 45 years in our town and in San Francisco. How many of you are Book Passage customers? Yes, we're all customers, aren't we? Especially tonight, yeah. So thanks to their vision for building education and community building into their tremendous business. I also want to thank our students, our faculty, and our staff who have been welcoming you tonight. We call them the Leadership Host Ambassadors. It's an honor to have our host ambassadors welcome you, and I hope you'll thank them for being hopefully welcoming to you. Thank you, Leadership Host Ambassadors. Thank you. And finally, our sponsors for tonight. Our diamond sponsor this year is Christine Christensen. Christine, give me a shake. Where are you, Christine? There you are, Christine. Christine Christensen of Compass, who has represented Marin's luxury real estate market for over 20 years. And thank you, Christine, for generously supporting our leadership lecture series. It is tremendous support to us, and we can't thank you for your dynamicness as a Dominican alumna in our MBA. Yes, we produced Christine. Thank you, Christine, and her mom, who also has a master's with us. Gro, thank you for being here tonight, Gro. Our silver sponsor is the Dominican Women Leadership and Philanthropy Council. How many of you are here tonight, WLPC members? I want to hear from you. Woohoo! Yes. We appreciate your enthusiastic support. The Women Leadership Philanthropy Council is a giving circle at Dominican University of California, and we care about advancing women's leadership and philanthropic considerations in our community and our world. Thank you, WLPC, for being our sponsor tonight. Appreciate you so much. Yes, let's thank them. And now I am honored to introduce Isabel Allende. Yes. You know that she's a novelist, she's a feminist, she's a philanthropist, she's one of the most widely read authors in the world, having sold more than 80 million copies of her books across 42 languages. She's received many incredible honors, including the highest civilian award in the United States, the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama. I'm just thrilled that she's with us tonight. She's joined by, in conversation with Matthew Félix. He's the author of 4 books, a certified life coach, and a former host of San Francisco's Writers' Conference podcast. He also hosts Book Passage's Personal Growth Book Group, and I'd love you to please join them both. Please welcome Isabel Allende and Matthew Félix to the stage.
Did you see that?
See what?
Did you hear that?
Oh, I did.
And did you notice that when you were mentioned, nobody applauded?
I actually did. What's it feel like to have so few people show up?
Yeah.
So, do we want to talk about something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First off, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for being here. And let's just dive right into this, to your new book. My name is Emilia del Valle, except Del Valle isn't her only last name. She actually has two last names. So can you tell us why that is and what they sort of represent?
Yeah. You have not read the book yet. You don't need to read it because I'll tell you what it is about.
Just save them some time.
Yeah, save them some time and wait for the movie.
And wait for, yeah. Or the Amazon series.
Yeah, you can wait like 20 years for the movie. Emilia is the illegitimate child of a Chilean aristocrat called Del Valle, who is passing by San Francisco, and he screws, well, he impregnates, is the right word?
I think screws. Yeah. I think you hit it with screws.
Impregnates a nun. Now, why a nun? I have no idea. She just popped up somehow. And so Emilia is the result of that short affair. And her mother thinks that she is entitled to some kind of inheritance in Chile. So she insists that she carry the name Del Valle. But she eventually marries a wonderful Mexican teacher who is Emilia's stepfather. And this character called Francisco Claro, I think.
Papo, yo creo que Claro.
I don't remember the last name, but
Claro is the last name.
Yeah.
That's why we have my notes.
But this guy is an homage to my stepfather. In my case, I didn't know my father, and I had a wonderful stepfather who would say to me, "Why is it that I'm never one of the characters in your books?" And I would answer, "Because you have common sense. People with common sense don't make good characters."
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, you want villains, you want lunatics, you want passionate people who take risks and screw up.
Right.
And fail.
Yes. And that's not the only time that the issue of names or the theme of names comes up. It actually comes up throughout the book, including still early on, she has to adopt or chooses to adopt a fictitious name. Can you tell us kind of what that's about?
Because she, as a woman in the late 1800s, her choices were really very limited. And professionally, there was very little that she could do. She wanted to be a journalist, and she has to use a pseudonym, a male name. And she writes dime novels, and also with a male pseudonym, because otherwise they wouldn't be published and nobody would respect her. By the way, when I wrote my first novel, my agent said, "You are going to have to do double the effort of any man to get half the recognition and respect." Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if that's the case, when I wrote the book in the 80s, can you imagine in the late 1800s? Yeah.
Well, and Emilia actually says, she says, quote, "Being a woman is a serious inconvenience to success in general, and particularly in a profession dominated by men."
Which were all the professions, by the way. They were all dominated by men.
So it's not hard to rule those out. So then lastly, I mean, this isn't actually lastly, but the third example of kind of the importance of names throughout the book is when she does eventually go to Chile, both to cover the Civil War and also in search of her father. And she learns that in Chile, names have a certain importance. They convey a certain meaning. Can you tell us about that?
Chile, to this day, but so much more then, is a class society. It's like castes in India, that only a Chilean person who has been born there and lives there can identify a person's class immediately, just by the way they walk, by the way they talk. You immediately can tell. And so she comes from the United States, from California, which at the time was a new town, and it was a town made of adventurers and bandits and preachers and Mormons and you name it. So, and And she gets to Chile and realizes that her name, Del Valle, opens all the doors.
Right.
And so the mother was very wise, insisting that she would carry that name.
Yep.
Because with that name, she's able to interview the president, to get in the social class of the generals and the people who really made the decisions during that civil war.
Right.
And I bring back in this book Paulina del Valle, who is a character in Daughter of Fortune, in Portrait on Sepia. She's just a bitch. And I love her because she's this heavy lady, completely outrageous, doesn't give a shit about anything. And when I wrote Daughter of Fortune and I have this character, my agent then, Carmen Balcells, said, she's just like me. I said, yeah, you were.
And she was.
Inspired the character.
And she recognized herself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess that she has a lot of self-knowledge then, it sounds like. She was able to recognize herself. So you just said, what is it? Nice people with common sense do not make good characters, or interesting characters. So what is it about Emilia that she obviously doesn't have common sense, or what is it about her that made her an interesting character?
She's courageous. Mm-hmm. She's willing to take risks. She's curious about the world. Her stepfather has instilled in her great confidence. So when she goes to look for a job in the newspaper, she's not intimidated by anybody, mm-hmm. and stands her ground. And then when she goes to Chile, she will find herself in the middle of a battlefield, in the most horrible circumstances. And she has the courage to do what she has to do. Right. And also she's at the same time generous and compassionate. She's not, she's a combination of both things. And that's the kind of complex, contradictory character that I usually love. Right. And actually, when she went and was in the office with the San Francisco Examiner editor, trying to get a job with him, he suggested that since she's a lady, she should write about flowers, an article about flowers to prove herself. And she says, I can't write about flowers because they bore me. I'm going to write about murder instead. Yeah. So that gives you a little insight. And then she also said, when she was talking about her dime novels, right, she said, quote, since the editors demanded that virtue and morality triumph, I was never able to get sufficiently inspired. Just couldn't be bothered. But those are a couple of humorous examples, but she does, as you just mentioned, she ends up on the battlefields. I mean, she experiences some very serious, not so humorous situations. When she leaves, she goes to an adventure, and she has to go by ship from California to Valparaiso in Chile, and it's like a very long trip. And she's the only woman on board of a battleship. And she laments that there was not a naval battle because the enemy ships were lost in the horizon and they did not meet. She has no idea what a battle is all about. And she later realizes that if there would have been a battle, one of those ships would have lost, and all the people aboard, and it could be her, would be dead. And she does end up witnessing battles, and in fact, after a battle, she and her friend have to spend the night in the woods. Yeah. And after spending the night in the woods, and they're in danger the whole time, right? And after that, she says, quote, that night I learned that I am stronger and more resilient than I ever imagined. I did not know who I truly was until circumstances put me to the test. So does it take being put to the test to truly know ourselves? You're a coach. You should know that. This is why you interviewed me before we started this. Yeah. But of course, I mean, I feel that all of us have no idea who we really are until the circumstances test us. And this is a moment in this country when we are all tested. And this is a moment, a moment when we have to really decide who we are. Are we going to be silenced by fear, or are we going to be challenged by fear and confronted?
And we're going to talk more about that.
Yeah. So that's her. Emilia finds herself in those circumstances in which she doesn't have to be in the battlefield. She can withdraw and witness the whole thing like the other journalists do from afar,
Yep.
from the top of the hill.
Including the men.
All the
Yeah.
men, from the top of the hill. But she wants to be down there with the soldiers,
Right.
and experience what they are experiencing, which is terrible fear and pain and death.
Right. And a lot of the adversity, as we've already sort of alluded to, and as we're going to talk a little bit more about, is related, of course, to the fact that she's a woman. I've heard you say that you were a feminist when you came out of the womb.
No, I was 5.
You were 5. Okay, well, I think maybe the seed was planted, but when you were 5 or 6, your family asked you, what do you want to do when you grow up? And you said, support myself at 5 or 6. And then early on, your mom was afraid, I think around that same time, something was wrong with you. You're never going to get married. And so she took you to a psychiatrist. All of which to say, and that was just the beginning, all of which to say, both in Emilia's case and in yours, you found the strength and courage to persevere in the face of these patriarchal obstacles. And that's not something to take for granted. So how and why and where did you do you find that courage?
I was very clear, very young, that I had to support myself because of my mom. My father abandoned my mother when she was going to give birth to my youngest brother. We are 11 months apart, so my mother was married 4 years and had 3 babies. And she was very young, and so by age 24, she had 3 babies in diapers and abandoned by the husband. And so she returned to, all this was in Peru, and she returned to Chile, and we grew up in my grandfather's house, where my mother had a roof over her head, and of course my grandfather paid for school, and we never went barefoot, but my mother never had any money, any pocket money. She was a charity case. She had to pay for the fact that she married the wrong man, my father. In the meantime, in Chile there was no divorce. In Chile we had divorce in 2004, I think. It was the last country after Ireland to have divorce. So the only way you could get free somehow was an annulment. That meant my mother annulled her marriage with the condition that my father demanded that he would never have to see his kids again. Mm. And so he never saw us, and he never paid a dime for our maintenance either. And then I saw my mom so vulnerable, always sick. The men in the house, and all my uncles lived in the house, bachelor uncles and my grandfather, they had the keys of the house, they had cars, they made decisions. They didn't have to say where they were going. Nobody was gossiping behind their backs. And my mother was not a victim because she could have gotten out of that, but she was incredibly vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I felt that as a child so strongly that I wanted to be like my grandfather, mm-hmm. not like my mom. Mm-hmm. And I adored my mom, but she was what I didn't want to be. You know, it's very interesting because the 2 big lessons that I have learned from my mom were in opposition. That was the first lesson, support myself. Mm. If a woman cannot support herself, if you don't pay your own bills, then you have to put up with a lot. And the other lesson I learned from my mom very late in life, very late. My stepfather was 103 when he died, and my mother was 98. My mother wanted to be a widow for 15 years. And she had the widow dress hanging in the closet with the shoes and the purse. They had fought for their relationship like crazy at the beginning, passionately. They got together, and finally they were able to be together, and when it was possible, they got married in Chile. By then they were in their 90s when they got married. And I think that at the end of their lives, they hated each other. They really did. They had a couch that it was called the love couch, el sillón del amor. El sillón del amor, so these two old people were carried to this sillón del amor, and they would sit there hating each other. And that I learned the lesson then that I don't want to live my life with, if it's not in love, I don't want to be in a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so I divorced my husband. You know what? I was 74 years old, and I said, I don't want to end up like my mom.
Right.
And I divorced my husband, and I was so happy and relieved.
No looking back.
No. When I look back, I say, why did I wait so long?
Well, one area where you might want to maybe not look back, but look around a little more, and an area in which you've found the strength and courage to persevere in spite of literal obstacles. And then in this case, I'm talking about obstacles you've hit, with your car, and not once, not twice, not 5 times, but how many times in Venezuela?
The traffic in Venezuela is really bad. Really bad.
How many times was it?
It was like 17 times. But it was not always my fault.
It wasn't always your fault?
No.
Okay, but how many accidents does it take in Venezuela before your license is revoked?
Oh, you can forever. It was never revoked. You can always bribe somebody and you get a new license.
And what about your neighbors in your neighborhood? When they see you coming down the road, do they just run?
Everybody runs.
Yeah.
To this day.
Yeah.
To this day.
Yes. So
you know what? I have 2 dogs, and they don't want to get in the car with me.
Right.
And when I push them in because I'm going to the vet, they fart because they are so nervous. They get so nervous, the poor animals.
Yeah, yeah. And you just roll the windows down and keep going.
Yeah, I keep going.
Yeah. So one aspect of Emilia's experience as a woman on which she refers to be subjective to the sort of traditional norms of the time is her sexuality. And she says, quote, "The dreadful danger of sensuality was something my mother had drilled into me from the time my breast..."
She was a nun, remember?
Her mom was a nun. A woman's ruin lies in abandoning herself to the shamelessness of the flesh, her mother preached. And yet, not only does that not stop Emilia, she readily explores her sexuality, like I said. And at the beginning of that exploration, she has a great teacher. She learns a lot. Later on,
I have this in several books.
You have this in several books.
In several books, I have my heroine that has a good lover at the beginning, so that she will be demanding. She will not compromise for less.
Well, and Emilia doesn't.
And in some cases, she has to teach the guy, because the first lover, who is the expert, is usually the wrong man to be with. So I have to get rid of him on page 60, more or less.
Yeah.
And then I have to bring in the good guy, who will be the real lover, the real man for this woman. But most of the time, because he's so good, he has no sexual experience.
She's got to teach him.
Yeah, so, and either he buys a manual, which doesn't work very well, or she teaches him.
Well, in this case, she says, quote, "I could guide him, but slowly and with care, because men have very fragile self-esteem. Men need to believe that they know more, especially in bed."
Yeah, so you have to do it very discreetly, like everything else.
Okay.
Right. My mother used to say, you can do everything you want, but don't make a fuss. Do it quietly, discreetly, with elegance. The same goes in bed.
Yeah. So
not that I'm an expert, I'm not. And at my age, I have forgotten how you do it anyhow. So.
I'm not sure that's true, but what about this notion that sharing pleasure is something that's learned? Because she talks quite a bit about that.
Maybe because that has been, my experience, that you really can learn, first of all, to like yourself. I think that it's very hard to be a good lover if you don't have a lot of self-confidence. And most women don't have it. We are ashamed of our bodies, we are ashamed of I don't know the young generations because they're like aliens to me, but normal people I'm talking about. It's hard, you know. We see a lot in the movies. Those, you know, they jump on each other and she clings to him and they, against the wall, they start screwing against the wall. I don't think it happened to me that way ever.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, it sounds as if aphrodisiacs have been helpful to you.
No, they were not.
They were not.
They were not.
Well,
I wrote a book about it.
You wrote a book about it, but I thought that you had narrowed it down to one particular aphrodisiac that now did work for you pretty well.
Viagra.
I'm thinking of something that is blue, but it's not a blue pill.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, Roger asked me to give you these.
Oh, these.
Do you want to share with them what those are?
Okay, these are marijuana blueberries.
Yeah, Roger said I needed to pass those along.
Yeah, and they really work, really work. So, and you can get them, it's legal in California. I travel with them just in case. I might meet Antonio Banderas somewhere, so I always carry them with me. Yeah.
But didn't you meet Antonio when he was in at least one of your...
Yeah, he was in
House of the Spirits.
In the House of the Spirits, Of Love and Shadows, and I have met him several times.
Yeah.
But the image I have of him was when I was launching the Infinite Plan in Barcelona. And there was in a beautiful Gaudi building. And we were standing on stage. There was a huge print or something of the book. And we had a glass of champagne and we were celebrating. And I saw my agent cross the crowd and she came forward and said, Paula is in the hospital. And I remember I gave my glass to Antonio and left and ran to the airport, took a plane and went back to Madrid to see Paula, who was in the hospital, and that was the last time I saw her conscious.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And you've never seen Antonio since then?
No.
Okay, well, we need to make that happen.
You know, I talk a lot about him. So I was I think it was in San Diego, and there was an event like this, and someone in the audience got up with a pillow with the face of Antonio Banderas. So I sleep with him.
Okay. Maybe a blueberry or two will help you with that. So, sexuality is obviously very political. You are known for your activism, particularly through your foundation, with which you work with women and children who are refugees. And yet you've said, quote, I try to separate activism from literature. The best way to ruin a good novel is by trying to deliver a message.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
When I read a book and I feel that the author is trying to convince me of some ideology or some message of some kind, I get upset. Mm-hmm. I don't like that. So I have divided everything that has to do with activism through the foundation, and in my work in fiction, I never do that. Mm-hmm. But I have written non-fiction in which I can explain anything I want. I did The Soul of a Woman, I have written memoirs, I did the course of the BBC, and so many other things that I have done where I can explain or give message, but not in a novel,
not
ever,
in fiction.
Ever.
Mm-hmm. Well, Emilia is reporting about politics, the civil war in Chile, as we've said, and she too is conscious of not delivering a message. She says, I was determined to remain objective, aware of the mistakes and abuses that had been committed on both sides. And that's something that struck me in this book, is how you represent the Civil War. I kept wanting to figure out which side I was supposed to root for, and then you would I could never really figure out what that was.
But that was intentional. Because
no, exactly. Yeah.
I wanted to tell, the book started with the Civil War in Chile in 1991, an event that I was always interested in because it has echoes with what happened in 1973, the military coup in Chile. In both instances, there was a president that was visionary and progressive, Balmaceda in 1991 and Salvador Allende in 1973, and they tried to make changes in the country, important changes that would benefit the poor, the people that were the underprivileged. And they faced great opposition from the conservatives. And eventually, the armed forces intervened. In the first instance, the armed forces split, and the army went with the government and the navy with the opposition. And there was a horrible civil war in which more Chileans died in 4 months than in the 4 years of the war against Peru and Bolivia. And you know that happened in the United States during the Civil War as well. More people died then than in all the wars we have had. Because it seems that when you are killing among brothers, it becomes terrifying. It becomes just horrible. And the brutalities that were committed in those 4 months are unspeakable. And then in 1973, the armed forces did not split, and they were all against the government, and we had a military coup and 17 years of dictatorship. And in both cases, the president committed suicide. So the parallels are so striking that I wanted to tell the story of the Civil War, but I wanted to tell it with a narrator that wasn't not of one or the other side, so a neutral voice. That's why I brought someone like Emilia from abroad.
Yep.
And so she sees both sides.
Yep. And it was, I was just really, like I said, I was trying to figure out who I was supposed to root for, and then I finally realized I wasn't, that it's not that simple. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So I found it really interesting. Twice in the book, the utility of voting is questioned. So one time Emilia is talking with an exotic dancer, and when Emilia says she thinks women should have the right to vote, the dancer retorts, whatever for? The vote certainly hasn't done men much good. Democracy's all rigged by a group of crooks. The only thing women can do is try to manage those crooks. And then later, Emilia is talking with 4 mining women, one of whom questions, what good does the right to vote do men miss? Nothing changes for us. And this made me think back to something you said in a TEDx talk that I thought was interesting as well. You questioned, does it make sense to participate in the current world order? And so all of that to ask, if we want to create meaningful, enduring change, do we need to take action outside of the system?
That's a very difficult question. Partly, yes. But we are living in a democracy or not, but in systems that are very old and have not adapted to the new world in which we are living together today. So what happens is that we have laws and constitutions and systems that young people don't feel represented at all. And so we see more and more skeptic young people who don't feel that they have to participate in the process and become very indifferent. So if things have to change, but they don't have to change to more authoritarian governments, on the contrary, we have to find systems in which everybody can participate and feel represented.
Right.
But that's the process that we are right now, that we have to find all these new ways.
Yep.
And also the way we vote in the United States is completely stupid. It's not a direct vote. I mean, if each vote counts, we would have a completely different spectrum here.
Right. So you write a lot of historical fiction, obviously, and one question that comes up in interviews a lot is this notion of history repeating itself, which we've already talked about a little bit. And that's something, again, that we can ask in this book that comes up. But I was watching your recent New York Times interview, and I found myself asking if your own history, what happened in Chile in '73, might be even more of a warning to those of us here in the States today. Specifically, you explained, quote, we got to, and this was when you were in Chile in '73, We got to know the consequences slowly because they don't affect you personally immediately. Of course, there were people who were persecuted and those were affected immediately, but most of the population wasn't. So you think, well, I can live with this. Well, it can't be that bad. No, it's impossible. So you're in denial for a long time because you don't want things to change that much. And then one day it hits you personally. So is there a lesson there for us here in the States today?
Yes. I think that we get used to things. Let me tell you what happened in Chile, which is different from what happened in Argentina. In Argentina, we had slowly creeping up what was called la guerra sucia, the dirty war, in which slowly but surely all the rights of the people were taken away. And there was brutal torture, people disappeared, bombs everywhere, it was terrible. In Chile, we had a military coup that changed everything in 24 hours. There was no time to react. In 24 hours, there was no more Congress, no more judiciary system independent, there was no more censorship of everything, the press, the books, the theater, everything was censored. And the most important thing, and this is already being discussed in the United States, they took away habeas corpus, which is due process. This means that the government has the right to arrest any person for indefinite time and no accountability. And that's how people disappeared. So that can happen in anywhere, and it happens in every authoritarian government or administration. You have to be very careful. So what I would say is fear is contagious, but so is courage. Courage is contagious also, and people have the power that we give them.
Thank you. So something else that's powerful, and one of the only things that helps me deal with these sorts of themes is humor, right? And as we've already seen, you find ways to inject humor into stories that otherwise tackle very serious themes. Just a couple of examples, and there are so many in this book in particular, but just very early on, and this is just a one-off, but he wore so much cologne, plants withered when we walked by. And I think I've met him, actually. I think I've met him. Later on, again, this is just a random one I chose, Guard was one of those men who enjoy impressing women with their knowledge and experience. The dumber my question, the more time he spent explaining. And of course, in the 1890s, mansplaining wasn't a term yet, right?
Yeah.
But how does humor fit into stories of love and loss?
I think that humor fits in life. Always, even in the worst circumstances, there is humor. And being a woman, you have to have humor. To live in a patriarchy and put up with men, you need a lot of sense of humor. Yeah, yeah.
So what about from a craft perspective? Because sometimes you manage to get humor into a very serious scene. So just from a craft perspective, how do you do, or is it just completely...
Random.
Just random?
It just happens.
Okay, that works. All right, thank you for your honesty. Let's talk a little bit more about process. You write in Spanish, but you're also very involved in English translations.
I have a very good translator, and the only translation that I check is the English.
Yeah.
My books are translated to 40-something languages. Most of them, I can't even read the alphabet. So I don't know if the book that comes is mine or not. Maybe if it has a photograph, I can say, okay, but I don't know which one of my books it is. But what were we talking about?
Well,
the
you like
translation?
having, I was just curious why because you could just trust that the translation's okay, but you like knowing what...
In English, I can check it.
Right.
And the only thing that is lost often is humor. Mm-hmm. Because humor is very cultural, and it belongs to a place and a time. It's like fish. It goes bad really quickly. Uh-huh. When I was living in Chile, I had a humorous column. This was in the 70s. And often I get requests to put all those articles together for a book. It's not funny at all because there's no connection.
Yeah, no context.
No context, nothing. Humor is always in a time that we are living and something that we can all relate to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Right. One other process-related question, and this is a big one at the moment, and I haven't heard you talk about it. I did find an article today where you did talk about it a little bit in writing, but I haven't actually heard you. And this is, discuss this, and this is AI, right? So there's a whole bunch, writers were just talking and freaked out, but then embracing, and it can do. So what are your thoughts on AI and if and where it fits into the process?
I'm hoping that it will write my next book.
Are you? Okay, yeah.
My son is already trying.
Your son's already trying.
Already trying, but we did this. When it first came out, not long ago, when it first came out, I said, Nico, what is this thing? And he said, okay, we will ask AI to write a children's book, an illustrated children's book, where the protagonist is a little boy and a dog and a little dog. And in less than 10 seconds, AI spit out the book that I had already written, Perla the Mighty Dog. Now, it was not published, so how did it get?
Ooh,
how did it
scary.
get the information?
Yeah.
It was not published. So now I'm thinking that that's what I'm going to do. Next time I will say, please write a love story with Antonio Banderas as a protagonist.
Yeah.
And let's see what happens. Yeah.
And not the pillow, the real Antonio Banderas.
And the pillow.
And the pillow. So another process question that we talk a lot about, people ask us a lot as writers is, where do you get your inspiration? But you actually say discipline is more important than inspiration.
Well, inspiration is wonderful, but it doesn't take you anywhere without the discipline. So for me, once I was with Elizabeth Gilbert on stage, and somebody from the audience asked, what advice do you have for young writers? And Elizabeth said, don't expect your writing to give you fame or money. Write because you love the process. And that's what happens to me. I love the process. So the discipline is easy. I start all my books on January 8th. I write all day, every day, because I love it.
But I did hear you say, and I was surprised to hear you say this, so I don't know if you were just saying it in the moment or if it's true and there's maybe
don't quote me because I lie all the time.
I'm going to quote you. I know. But I did hear you say that you wouldn't write if people weren't going to read your books.
What?
Okay. She was lying when she said that.
What did I say?
You said that you wouldn't write if you didn't know that people were going to read the books.
I need to tell something to someone. All my life, I wrote to my mother a letter every night, and she would write to me every day as well. Since 1987, I have been collecting these letters, and we have around 24,000 letters in boxes. And my mother died in 2018, and I tried to keep writing to her every day, as I did before, out of habit, but also because writing a letter a day forced me to pay attention, to be present in the day, and notice what was going on so that I would have something to tell my mom at night. And it didn't work. I tried for a month to write to the ghost, but I never got a reply, and so eventually I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I've never been able to write a journal or write thinking that there's nobody there to read it. Why would I do it?
Yeah, because if we're telling stories, we want them to
I want to
be
give
heard.
the story to someone and get some feedback.
Yeah. Well, even though you stopped writing the letters and you're not as present in that same way that you were, nonetheless, inspiration continues to come to you. And I loved how you described the process of your initial inspiration in your Penguin Random House Q&A that you just did. You said, the first thing about a story is a seed in the belly, something that is there inside. And I say the belly and not the brain because I'm not even aware that it's there. So can you tell us how that seed then starts to take root and flourish?
The seeds can be things that I've heard, a dream, an experience, a memory, a person that can inspire something, and it's quietly there. The best example that I can think of is Long Petal of the Sea, which is the story of a Spanish refugee from the Civil War in Spain in 1936. I met this man in Caracas in 1973, and I wrote the book recently. The seed of his story was in my belly for 40 years. And why did it stay there? Why did it come up? It came up because now we have the problem with refugees in the world. And so more and more the subject of refugees and migrants is in the air. And so then I remembered this man that was a very good friend, who also died at 103, that escaped from the Civil War, came to Chile, had a life in Chile, then we had the military coup, and he had to escape again as a refugee to Venezuela, where I met him. And it was his second exile. And that seed stayed there, but I don't think it would have come up without this thing in the air that is there. Mm-hmm. There are 117 million refugees in the world, most of them women and children. But that doesn't mean anything, it's a number, until we know one person, until we can tell the story of one person. And that's what happened, for example, with The Wind Knows My Name. It's the story of a little girl, blind girl, that was separated from the mother at the border. And I had heard many, many stories, numbers, 40,000 American lawyers that are trying to represent kids in court. But until you see one person, you learn the name. She's called Juliana. She has a mother. She comes from El Salvador. When you identify the person, then you see what it means.
Right. It
not before.
Right. It ceases to be abstract and humanizes.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So some of what you just described and a lot of what I read sounds as if a lot of the actual process, once that seed does germinate, part of it happens because, like you said, maybe it's topical, but also it sounds as if your process is very intuitive. Is intuition a big part of your creative process?
It must be, because sometimes, according to Lori, my daughter-in-law, I write what is going to happen. For example, it takes me 4 years to write Island Beneath the Sea, which is about the slave revolt in Haiti. And it's published the same week of the earthquake in Haiti, when Haiti is all over the press. So it's things like that, you know.
But what about the actual putting together of the story? Do you have a big outline for your stories?
No outline.
Yeah.
If it's a historical novel, I have researched the event, the place, and the time. And that's it. Then I don't have the characters, I don't have the story, I don't have anything. But I show up day after day, word after word. The story comes together like a puzzle. And I love that process because I don't know what the characters will do. They surprise me often. They do. They do stuff that, why did this happen? And sometimes they put me against the wall and I find myself in a situation that seems to have no way out. And that's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, intuition matters to Emilia. At one point she comments, quote, "Reason should guide our actions, but the heart laughs in the face of logic and does whatever it pleases." And then much later after the war, this is, like I said, much later, she's overcome by this unshakable intuition about what's next for her. She says, quote, "Why did I do it? Because with a flutter in my gut, I felt a visceral, irresistible yearning." So does your intuition help you in major life events, in kind of moving forward, like it does with her?
Often, I don't have a choice. I mean, things happen and I just have to go in a certain direction. And sometimes intuition has made me choose the wrong lover, and it's a disaster. So I don't trust my intuition that much. I wish I had a little bit more common sense. But now that I don't have hormones, that's not a problem.
Okay. Okay.
So,
So your intuition's no longer leading you astray?
no, not sexually at least.
Not sexually. Okay. So you once defined, speaking of, passion as the capacity to take risks that you're not afraid of life. And perhaps our only fear greater of life is of death, and we alluded to this earlier as well. Not surprisingly, in a book focused on the Civil War, there's a lot of death. But it's not just on the battlefield. It comes up in unexpected ways, and again, not surprisingly, Emilia herself has to confront her own mortality in some of the situations she finds herself in. You were no stranger to losing loved one. We already mentioned that you lost Paula. You wrote the memoir of the same name about that and your experience with that. In a recent interview with Adela Micha, a Mexican journalist, you talked about how at the moment of Paula's death, your perspective on life underwent an immediate shift. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Everything happened that year. It was the year that Paula was in a coma, a year of stillness. It was also the year of menopause, but I didn't even notice it because I was completely focused on Paula. But there was nothing to do. It was a year in which you just sit next to her and hold her hand, and nothing happens. It's just stillness and silence and waiting. And I think that very few people ever have the chance to stop, to really stop and reflect about who you are, what you want, what was your past, what are you afraid of, and what are you not afraid of. And it was a very strange situation and very prolonged, very exhausting in a way. But after that, I think that I changed in many ways. One very important one is letting go. If I couldn't control that situation, if I couldn't keep my daughter alive, well, there's very little that I can control. There's very little that matters. So I can let go of everything material to begin with. And then also of people, of situations, of ideas, of obsessions. And in a way, I start separating what is really essential for me, the very few things that are really essential. And that's what I care for. But now that I'm 82, I see death right there. I don't think I'm going to die tomorrow, but who knows? In any case, time is very limited. The road is very short, and I will get there soon enough. So I see that with no fear at all, with no anxiety, just with the desire to enjoy every day with Roger, with the dogs, with Nico and Lori, because that's sacred to me, and nothing else is important. And for as long as I can have this day as perfect as possible, I'm good. It's the being in the present which is so important.
Do you think there's any way for us to get to that state without having to have something dire, such as the death of a loved one?
If you reach my age, you will get it. You will get it. Don't worry about it.
Fingers crossed, knock on marble. In your recent New York Times interview, you commented along these lines about aging. You said, quote, "People don't want to hear about aging. It's like ugly, and it can be, of course, but it can also be very liberating and a very wonderful journey." So what specifically about it are you finding liberating?
What I just said, letting go.
Yeah.
I can't control anything. I can't control death or life or anything. Let it go, let go. And don't get attached to stuff, and to ideas and ambitions and desires and stuff. There's so much clutter in our lives. And just, I think that's very liberating. And also it's liberating a sort of invisibility that comes with aging, that you don't have to, because you are not seen, you don't have to pretend anything. You are just you. And that's in a way, very comfortable. I mean, I wish I could wear, for example, stiletto heels. But just let go of that too, because who cares? I mean, I will always be the shortest person in the room, with or without stiletto heels, so let go.
Yeah. Let go of the stilettos. Okay, one last question, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. In your book passage talk with Elaine a few years ago, you said...
Again, you're going to quote?
I'm going to quote you again. This is a good one. I think you'll own this one, I think. And if not, you just won't. But you said, I don't change people. I just make people realize who they truly are.
In which context would I say something like that?
I think you were saying it...
But maybe I'm talking about the characters in a book, but...
I think the context was, you know, people coming up to you saying that you've changed my life,
now I
things
remember.
like that. Right.
Now I remember.
Right.
Because I get a lot of letters from young people, and sometimes not so young, that they say, I read your book, and I decided this or that, or I changed this or that, or you made me think this or that.
Right.
And I always tell them, you already are that person. That idea was already inside you. I just put it in words, and you connected to that part of you that was always there. So I don't change people. I just maybe open a window so that they can see themselves differently.
Right.
And I get incredible, incredible letters. Let me give you an example. I don't know what you are applauding, because there's nothing particularly wise about what I said. I get wonderful letters. For example, I get a letter of a young woman who says she has a wonderful boyfriend who is rich and handsome and whatever, but he beats her up. And so I answer immediately, and I say, leave him right now, because this will never get any better. It will get worse. Leave him right now. And then a week later, I get a letter from the boyfriend who says, how dare you say that to my girlfriend? You have not heard my version of the story. So you see, you can get all this kind of wonderful stuff, material for a book.
All right, so thank you. And thank all of who submitted questions. No, thank you. We're going to, these are just sort of random order. So let's just start with this one. What was the biggest challenge and the part you enjoyed the most of writing My Name is Emilia del Valle?
The biggest challenge was the research, because there's a lot of historical information and military documents for the battles and the cannons and the weapons and the regiments, but it's the personal story. So I start asking questions, and I have to find the answers in the research. That is not easy. For example, I ask, what happened to the dead horses and mules that were killed in battle? Was there any way that they could do an amputation with some kind of numbing the patient in some form? How did the water get to the battlefield? And then by answering and trying to find the answer to the question, you go deeper and deeper and deeper in the research. And then fantastic things appear that can create. For example, there is a whole chapter in the book about the canteen girls. And the canteen women, were not girls, were the women that followed the regiments, walking behind the troops. And they carried water and food, and they took care of the wounded. They were the mothers, the sisters, the wives, the daughters that would walk behind the regiment, the canteen girls. And I started researching. Very little is written about them, but they existed. And they would be treated like soldiers. If they were defeated, they would be killed, executed. So they had all the work and the effort and the compassion with no reward. So that kind of stuff that you get in the research is what is most difficult to find, but is the most rewarding. Because creating the story, moving the characters around, giving lovers to Emilia is really easy.
Especially after she's had all that teaching.
Of course.
And you do most of your research yourself, although you have your brother helping you a little bit, but most of the research...
he helps me a lot.
He helps you a lot. Yeah.
I have
but
a
you
brother,
don't have a team.
I have a brother who is vegan and has 5 cats, and he's retired. So whatever I ask, he immediately plunges into the research and sends me innumerable links and documents and books, and I have to scan that to see what's really useful.
Right. Okay, so this next question ties to something we talked about just a few moments ago, and this was your relationship with your characters, and you know, sometimes they're putting you up against the wall. And this, have any of your characters ever refused to follow the path you intended for them?
I never intend anything.
Mm-hmm.
I create a character because I need the character, and then we will see. For example, in Emilia, I wanted a woman to tell the story. She had to be a journalist, otherwise why would she tell the story? How would she get there? Now, why would they send her? Why would they send a woman as war correspondent? That was impossible at the time. Mm-hmm. Well, she speaks Spanish. Why does she speak Spanish? I have to find a way of giving her the language. Mm-hmm. Okay, so she grows up in the Missions district in San Francisco, and she has a Mexican stepfather. He speaks Spanish at home.
Papo.
Yeah. And so why Chile? She needs to have a connection in Chile. So let's make the bastard father that she has be Chilean. Chilean husbands, by the way, are not great. And so one thing links to the other. And as I start developing the character, they do stuff. Mm-hmm. They become what I was not expecting. Why on earth would I want the mother to be a nun? I don't like nuns in particular. Excuse me, the nuns, the Dominican nuns.
Know your audience. Know your audience.
Yeah, well, sorry. But why a nun? I have no idea. She just came that way and I couldn't change her.
Yeah, yeah.
And so she started acting like a nun. And she's prudish, and she is, not that all nuns are prudish, I know that. But there's a lot of Catholicism that she instills in her daughter because it's so strong in her.
Right, right. A question about another character, or a specific character, actually. This person says, I noticed that Joaquin Murrieta's head was mentioned on page 2 of your new book. Are Eliza Summers and Emilia del Valle connected somehow?
Yeah.
Any chance we will get a story from one of Eliza's children?
That's very cute. I don't have time to write a story about Eliza's children, but I wrote Daughter of Fortune, which happens during the time of the gold rush. And I have a character who is Eliza, who will come to the gold rush following a lover. And she's looking for her lover desperately for the whole book. And the lover is called Joaquin Andieta, and he's Chilean. And when she comes here, there's the story of the bandit Joaquin Murrieta. And so there's a confusion between one and the other and whatever. Joaquin Murrieta apparently is a legend, and there were several Joaquin Murrietas, 2 brothers in particular, during that time. And they were committing crimes one day in the morning in LA and in the afternoon in San Francisco, and they had to ride on a horse to get here, so that was impossible. And so finally, they put a price on the head of Joaquin Murrieta, and a Captain Love went with a bunch of men, or volunteers, to look for Joaquin Murrieta and and come back for the reward. He couldn't find him, but he found a group of Mexicans that were cowboys, that were sitting there having a barbecue or something, and he killed them all. He cut the hand of one and the head of Joaquin Murrieta, of another one, and brought them back to San Francisco saying that this was the head of Joaquin Murrieta and the hand was from his lieutenant. And they were put in some jars with tequila or something, and they were exposed to the public from 1850 to the the earthquake in 1906. So for half a century, this head was in a jar and moving it around, and you paid $1 to watch the head. So in Daughter of Fortune, finally, my protagonist finds herself in front of the head in the jar, and she looks at the head and says, I am free now. Now, this is an open ending. Why is she free? Is it the head of her lover, or is it not? Or is she going to give up the idea of finding the lover? So I left it there. And Oprah chose Daughter of Fortune for her book club. Let me tell you, that is consecration. It's much better than the Nobel Prize. Much better. And so I went to Chicago to her show, and she said, that she had, in the public, that she had loved the book, but she didn't like the ending. What was that ending, that head there? So I had to write another book called Portrait in Sepia to explain about the head. And all this happens with the family del Valle that is connected from Daughter of Fortune to Portrait in Sepia to the House of the Spirits to Violeta, and now here to Emilia. These are all the relatives from my mother's side. With relatives like that, I don't need to invent anything.
So this one isn't a question, it's more a message. It's, Hola Isabel, feliz Dia de las Madres. I traveled 5 hours to see you, not counting the 2 times we got lost.
Who is that person?
Raquel Rodriguez. We're glad you made it.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's not worth it, 5 hours. You can YouTube it tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, it's live streaming right now. She didn't really have to.
She didn't have to do that.
When you go to Chile, do you still feel the connection with Chile, or has everything changed too much?
It's another country I left Chile many, many years ago. The world has changed, the country has changed, I have changed. So I go back, and I have this country in my head and in my heart that is not the same country, at least Santiago is not. But when I go to the deep south, I find my country. And that's what happens in this book. There is a pilgrimage that Emilia does to the south of the south, the area of the volcanoes and the forests and the lakes. And that is so embedded in me that I feel that that's the only place where I really belong. I'm visiting everywhere else.
Along those lines, this is sort of a follow-up. Where have you been happier, in Chile or outside of Chile?
I am happy. The happiest I am is at home with my husband and my 2 dogs.
Dulce y Perla.
Dulce y Perla.
So sweet and pearl. We're doing the BBC course, but in English. Are you going to have one, I'm translating, in Spanish? Thank you. We love Isabel, las españolas del fondo. ¿Dónde están las españolas del fondo?
The BBC Maestro did a course with me, and they called it Magical Storytelling. They came to our office for a week. I don't know how many cameras, and like 16 people. They took over the whole thing. And I had to be, every day, exactly the same clothes, exactly the same hair, exactly the same chair, for hours, sitting there without an outline, so no script. And they would ask a question, for example, how do you develop a character? And then I would improvise for 45 minutes about how to develop a character and give some examples and whatever. And before I did this, my agent fought with the BBC for the contract so that I would have the copyright of the material, because it's my material, no? My content. And so finally we got that agreement, and then they did the course, and I said, okay, now I'm going to write a book about writing. The BBC publishes the manual, so no book. but it's only in English, and I don't think it will ever be in any other language. Gracias, guapa tú.
Okay, this is another one in Spanish, so I'm just gonna, if you could give advice to an 18-year-old girl, what would you tell her?
Don't be afraid. Take risks. Life is long. You have time to make a lot of mistakes, and there is also time to make amends. Just go ahead, live as much as you can. Try not to have kids too young. I had my kids really young, and everything changes, you know. Once you have kids, everything changes.
So tell me if you may or may not have sort of covered this, but I'm just going to ask, how has living in exile shaped your sense of home, and how does that influence your characters?
You know, I've always said that I wrote The House of the Spirits as an exercise in longing. I was living in Venezuela. I was almost 40 years old. I felt that my life was going nowhere. I felt so alien in Venezuela. I never quite adapted. And I was always thinking of going back to Chile. But in 1981, when I wrote The House of the Spirits, we still had the dictatorship. It was impossible to go back. That experience of wanting to go back, of always feeling that you are just for a while here, that is very typical of refugees. They are always thinking of the old country, not immigrants. Immigrants are usually young. They choose to leave their place of origin. Usually they have in mind where they are going, and they look at the future. They are not looking at the past wanting to go back. They are going to make a life in another place. It's the future. Their children will belong there. Their grandchildren will belong there. A refugee never thinks that way. The way that we think is, when are we going to get back? And usually it takes between 17 and 25 years for a refugee to go back, and if they do, because most of them don't. So the experience is very, very different. But I don't think I would be a writer today without that experience. I wrote The House of the Spirits because I was desperate, and I was so frustrated that my life was so empty, so banal. There was nothing I could show after 40 years of living.
Mm-hmm. So my friend is a third-generation refugee, and you just made me think. She said, given the political climate here, even though she grew up here, she came...
From where is she?
She came from what was Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Her father was a refugee from Russia, then had to be a refugee a second time from what was Yugoslavia. She ended up growing up in a refugee camp for 5 or 6 years in Trieste, in Italy. But she said something the other day. She said, it doesn't matter that I grew up here, that I'm a citizen, and that I have been for many, many decades. She's in her 70s now. She said, you're always a refugee, and that there's still that fear. She was going to travel, and she was a little worried about coming back in, and that's even before this current round.
I don't feel that way.
You don't feel that way?
No.
Yeah.
I feel that I have, as I said, I'm always a foreigner. I have an accent, I look like a foreigner, and I am a foreigner. But it's fine. I love it because it gives me another perspective, and I don't want to be like everybody else. I want to be different.
I don't think there's danger of that. So, 2 more questions. This one we return to politics. Do you think that North Americans will eventually take politics as seriously as their neighbors to the south?
Yes, I think so, but because you have not experienced yet what has happened in other countries. Americans are very naive, and they're very pampered in a way. And they have no idea. Democracy is like good health. You take it for granted until you don't have it. And then you miss it, and then it's very hard to get it back. But this country has not experienced any of that. So it seems like a joke right now, but you just wait. And there is a point when people react. I mean, countries with authoritarian governments, let's say Turkey, for example, right now, or any other country, or El Salvador, or whatever. People are desperate to change it, and it's very hard because to change an authoritarian government is scary. It's a huge risk to be in the resistance or the opposition. Mm-hmm. But there's a moment when there is a critical number of people, and that critical number changes the balance. What happened in Chile was incredible because during the dictatorship, all political parties were eliminated, suspended indefinitely. And as I said before, everything was controlled. So Pinochet wanted to be elected president so that he would be in the history books as an elected president. And so he proposed a plebiscite in which he would ask the people, you want me to continue for 8 more years as president? And the ballot was yes. And you don't want me? The ballot was no. The campaign of the government was huge. It had all the media. And it gave the opposition, the no, 15 minutes at 11 o'clock at night on television. And the whole country waited until 11 o'clock at night to see the 15 minutes of the opposition campaign. That was a happy, joyful campaign. The other one was a campaign of fear. This is what will happen if we don't have Pinochet. So we had the plebiscite and we won. The opposition won. And for a moment, Pinochet thought, well, we will do another coup. But then the generals said, no, this time we are not with you. And the United States, the CIA, who had intervened before to support the coup and Pinochet, said, no, things have changed now in Latin America. We cannot have this again. Mm. So things do change, but sometimes they take a long time. But if there is that critical number like it was then for the no, things do change.
Which is where the contagion of courage is so important.
Yeah.
We talked about earlier. Yep. Okay, one last question that's a little lighter. And I don't know if this is a super easy question or a super hard question. We're about to find out. What book of yours did you enjoy writing the most?
The House of the Spirits.
The House of the Spirits.
Because I wasn't thinking. I was totally innocent. I knew nothing about the book industry. I didn't know I was writing a book. I had no idea what I was doing. Naive, innocent, free. I had never read a book review in my life like most normal people. I didn't know that there were editors and publishers and reviewers and professors and all that. I didn't know any. I was just a good reader, and I loved to read. And I liked telling stories. That was it. But the freedom, the joy of writing without any plan, it has never happened again. It was when I finished the book, my husband then, Miguel, he's a civil engineer, so he read the manuscript and said, this is so disorganized. You have people here in page 60 who are 18 years old, and 360 pages later, he's still 18 years old? What happened? So between him and my son, Nico, they made a chart where they put the dates and the characters, and so we could organize it a little bit. Then it was at the time there were no computers, of course. So there was only one manuscript, no copies, just one manuscript. Yeah. And my mother read this one manuscript and was very offended because I had given the villain the last name of my father. My mother didn't like my father at all, you may imagine. But she thought that it was the family. She had to defend the family. So she said, why did you give him that name? I said, oh, don't worry, we changed the name. Yeah, changed the name without a computer. So all the family sitting on a long table, passing page by page, with a ruler going line by line, and where the name appeared, Nico would paint it with Typex, Paula would, with the hair.
White out? Or?
Yeah, would dry it with a hair dryer.
Oh.
And then I would put it back and that name had to have one letter less than the other name so that you could fit it in that space. That was delete, paste. That was that.
Yeah, different process. Thank God for word processors.
Yeah, and so all the joy, that was joyful too, you know. Everything was just done by hand. It was a family project. It was just incredible. And of course, my family in Chile didn't speak for me until the movie came out. And then they were so offended. But when the movie came out, now the photographs of Antonio Banderas and Jeremy Irons and
Winona Ryder
and
Glenn
Meryl
Close
Streep and all
Streep,
of them are on the pianos of people.
Yeah.
And that's the official story of my family now.
All right, and that's the story, and you're sticking to it.
Yeah.
We have come to an end. I would like to
Thank
talk to
you
you for
so
another
much.
90 minutes.
Thank
but,
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.